This week's Knitting SOS is on fixing problems with lost or forgotten German short row double stitches. A forgotten double stitch is when you've turned and slipped the stitch, but you forgot to create the double stitch. A lost double stitch would be when you've pulled the needle out of your work, intentionally or unintentionally, and then had to recapture the live stitches and you've lost your double stitches. Now, you may or may not know this, I have mentioned it in previous videos, but German short rows and Japanese short rows produce the exact same result. Both create double stitches, but they do it at different points in the short row process. German short rows create the double stitch when the short row turn is first done and the working yarn is pulled over the needle. Japanese short rows create the double stitch when you return to the turning point. The running thread between the turning stitch and the adjacent stitch is lifted onto the needle and that creates the double stitch. So we can use Japanese short row techniques to correct problems that we have with German short rows. As always, if you would like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. So let's start with adding a forgotten German short row double stitch using Japanese short row techniques. So here you can see there's a double stitch right here. Then I have this locking stitch marker is hanging on the running thread between the slip stitch and the stitch next to it. And then for this stitch right here, we just see that there's a gap here. This is the turning stitch that was turned and slipped, and we can see that it's marked by that gap. Let's take a look at the double stitch up close. So when you look over the top, you can see that these two strands here in front are, this is the same strand, it's just doing a U-turn over the front of the needle. And here is the stitch below the needle that got pulled up on top. So now we come to the marker that's on the working yarn. And the way the Japanese short row works in this scenario is you pull up on the running thread and you insert the left needle from the front to the back like this, and then you can take the marker off. Well, what do we have here? We have the strand in front that's doing the U-turn and the stitch below has been pulled up. So that tells you how this double stitch is created. That is just simply the running thread between the two stitches is what creates the double stitch. And so you're working the slip stitch together with that running thread, and that's what you're working together. So now what have we learned about how to create a double stitch? We just can lift that running thread next to stitch. So I can just stick my needle under there, and now I've created that double stitch. You can see that I have the U-turn of the yarn and the front of the needle, and now I can knit it. on the front of the needle, we have, there's a U-turn, that it's the stitch that was pulled up from below the needle. And on the purl side, we have a U-turn with crossed legs. So now we're going to work this double stitch together. And now we're going to work to this marker. Now, the Japanese short row is worked a little bit differently, just like the German short row is worked a little differently, where we had to bring the yarn to the knit side of the work. We had to bring it in front and pull it over. In this case, this is our turning stitch. We stop before the turning stitch. We slip the turning stitch to the right-hand needle, and then we use the stitch marker to lift up the running thread between the two stitches and place it on the left needle. See, I'm coming under it and placing it on my left needle. And now I can slip this stitch back to the left. And now you'll see I have that those crossed legs here. And we don't have a marker on there, but this is the strand right here. You could use a marker and put it on here if you wanted to see. And once again, you lift this up, or you can just use your left-hand needle to come under it without lifting it. I think it's easier to use the marker. And you slip this stitch back, and again you have your crossed legs right here. Now when you've pulled the needle out of your work and you have to recapture live stitches, you always have the challenge of making sure that your stitches are mounted correctly on the needle when you work them so that they don't twist. Now that challenge is a little more difficult when it comes to those short row turning points, because you have a slip stitch that's just making a U-turn in the fabric. But once you understand how to get those stitches seated on the needle correctly, you can then use the Japanese short row technique to recapture the lost double stitch. So let's do that. Okay, so I have 3 double stitches on the needle right now. I'm going to pull my needle out, and now I'm going to recapture my stitches. Now you can kind of see where the double stitches were. I'm not going to worry about capturing those. I'm just going to get the actual stitches on the needle. I don't care about the orientation of any of the stitches at this point. I just care about getting stitches on the needles. Slip stitches wanting to come out of here a little bit so I can recapture that part, the actual slip stitch. There, okay, so I've got all my stitches back on the needles, and I can see where the turning points are because of the gaps, of these gaps. That's where the turning points were. So now I'm going to start knitting across until I get to that slip stitch. Okay, so we've got 3, 4, and now we're going to look at, this is the slip stitch on the needle, and you can see how it just kind of loops around. This running thread between the stitches should be the same strand that's coming around the back side of the needle. So what we don't want is we don't want it to be like this, where, pull on this a little bit, where when I pull on this running thread, it's pulling the front stitch. We want this mounted over the back side like that, so you can see. Now at this point we can make our double stitch. So we lift that running thread onto the needle and we create that double stitch, and now we can knit it. And then we check to make sure that what we got was not in fact twisted. So we checked our work and that's okay. Okay, so now we need to check this slip stitch, and we can see that the running thread, the top running thread here, is the same thread that's coming around the back side of the needle, so this is correct. So now we can lift that running thread up here to create our double stitch, and we can work it. And again, we want to look so that running thread is the same thread that's coming up the back side of this needle, so that's on here correctly. We lift that onto the needle to create that double stitch. We can work it. And now we're all done. We just make sure that as we're knitting these, that they're all mounted correctly on the needle and that they aren't going to twist as we knit them. So pull the needle out. And I just find it easier to do this from the knit side. Since they're curling toward the knit side, I just turn the work in order to recapture the stitches. And again, I capture them as best I can. Okay, now I think I have these all oriented correctly, but I'm not 100%. So as we purl across, we're going to purl across to the point where the gaps are. Those gaps mark the turning point. So these are the slip stitches right before those gaps. So when you're looking at this, the best thing to do is to grab that running thread right there. Grab it like this, and then you can pull on it. And what you want to see is that the strand it's pulling on is the one coming over the back side of the needle. And you want it so that that strand is to the left and the one coming over the front is to the right. Then you can slip this one back and put this on the needle and return that. And then you should be able to see that you have a little U-turn right here. And you'll know you have it right if when you work them, first of all, it won't feel super tight when you're knitting, but when you're done, you can look on this side and you can see that that is not twisted. So if it's this one is a little split, so we just want to get it on here so it's correct. There's that running thread right here. We want to grab that. And this time it's pulling on this one on the front, and we don't want that, so we want it so it's like this. So again, I'm going to put this back on the needle, slip the stitch over, pull this running thread up, put it on the needle, slip this one back again. And then the test will be, and we can check and see we've got our little U-turn. When we purl them together, then we're going to look on and see if it's been knit correctly. It's not twisted. Here's that running thread, and we want to pull on it. And this looks like it's not mounted correctly. This is the strand that we need to have in the back. So that when they're on the needle, the back one is to the left. It's oriented like that. We slip it over here. We pull on this so that we can get our needle underneath. Slip it back. Check for our U-turn. Purl it. And then we want to check to make sure that it's not twisted. This knitting SOS video was made by request. If you have an idea for a knitting video that you'd like to see me make, you can make it down in the comments, or you can join me on Ravelry in my group, Rocks. If you're interested in any of my previous short row videos, I have a playlist that you can check out here. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.